It was a dark and stormy night, and I was driving down a lonely country road. The rain was pounding on my windshield, making it hard to see anything beyond the headlights of my car. I was heading home after a long day at work, eager to get back to the warmth and safety of my house. Suddenly, I saw a figure on the side of the road, drenched and shivering. Against my better judgment, I decided to pull over and offer a ride. The figure turned out to be a young woman, her clothes soaked and her face pale. She thanked me profusely as she got into the car, her voice trembling with cold. I offered her a blanket I had in the back seat and asked where she was headed. She mentioned a small town a few miles down the road, and I agreed to take her there. As we drove, the woman introduced herself as Sarah. She seemed nice enough, but there was something off about her. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. She spoke in a soft, almost monotone voice, and her eyes seemed to stare right through me. The conversation was stilted and awkward, but I chalked it up to her being cold and scared. Sarah started to tell me about the town she was from, mentioning that it was a place with a lot of history and, more ominously, a lot of ghost stories. I felt a chill run down my spine as she described some of the local legends, including one about a hitchhiker who haunted the very road we were driving on. According to the legend, the hitchhiker was a young woman who had died in a car accident many years ago. She would appear to drivers on stormy nights, seeking a ride to her home. I started to feel uneasy. I glanced over at Sarah, who was now staring out the window with a strange, distant look in her eyes. Her story was too similar to the one she had just told. My heart began to race as I realized that I might have picked up more than just a stranded traveler. Trying to keep my voice steady, I asked Sarah more about her hometown. She responded with vague answers, avoiding any specifics. My mind raced as I recalled the details of the legend. According to the story, the hitchhiker would disappear just before reaching her destination, leaving the driver in a state of shock. As we neared the town, my anxiety grew. I kept glancing at Sarah, expecting her to vanish at any moment. The rain had let up slightly and the road was now visible. Just as we reached the town's outskirts, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. I looked over, and Sarah was gone. The passenger seat was empty, the blanket lying untouched. My hands shook as I pulled over to the side of the road. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had picked up a ghost. In a daze, I continued driving, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and the spot where Sarah had disappeared. As I drove through the town, I noticed a small cemetery by the side of the road. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled over to take a closer look. Among the gravestones, I found one that made my blood run cold. It was a weathered stone bearing the name Sarah Johnson, and the date of her death exactly 20 years ago, on a stormy night just like this one. I was driving home late at night after a long shift at work. The road was empty, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I turned on the radio to keep myself company, flipping through the stations until I found one playing some old rock music. The familiar tunes helped keep me awake as I navigated the winding country roads. Suddenly, the radio started to act up. The music faded into static, and strange noises filled the car. I tried to adjust the dial, but the static persisted. Frustrated, I turned the radio off, but the noises continued, now coming from the speakers even with the radio off. My irritation turned to fear as I realized the noises were forming words. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers, saying my name over and over. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I glanced at the radio, which was still off, but the voice persisted, growing louder and more insistent.
Kevin, help me.
The voice was faint but unmistakable, sounding desperate and pleading. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I was alone in the car, and there was no logical explanation for the voice I was hearing. As I drove, the voice began to tell a story. It spoke of a car accident that had happened on this very road years ago. A young woman had lost control of her vehicle and crashed into a tree, dying instantly. Her name was Sarah, and she had been driving home from a late shift at work, just like me. The voice grew more emotional as it recounted the details of the accident, describing the woman's fear and pain in her final moments. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the voice was coming from Sarah herself, reaching out from beyond the grave. The voice then changed tone, becoming urgent and frantic.
Kevin, you have to turn back. You have to leave this road. It's not safe. Please, you have to believe me.
My fear turned to confusion. I didn't understand what the voice was trying to tell me. I considered turning back, but I was so close to home and desperate to be off the road.
Please, Kevin, listen to me. There's something
My hesitation was cut short by a sudden flash of light ahead. I slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding a massive pothole that had appeared in the road. The voice had saved me from a potentially deadly accident. Shaken, I pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. The voice had gone silent, the radio returning to normal. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I was driving home late one night after visiting a friend. The road was deserted, and the only light came from my car's headlights cutting through the darkness. I was about halfway home when I noticed something in my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights rapidly approaching from behind. At first, I thought it was just another driver, but as the car got closer, I realized it was coming at an alarming speed. The car behind me began to flash its high beams, blinding me momentarily. My heart raced as I tried to maintain control of my vehicle. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between myself and the aggressive driver, but the car matched my speed, staying right on my tail. No matter how fast I drove, the other car was right there, its headlights glaring in my mirror. My mind raced with fear and confusion. I tried to think of a way to lose the car, but found myself on a long stretch of road with no turnoffs or places to hide. I began to feel trapped, as if the car was herding me towards some unknown destination. Desperate, I pulled out my phone to call the police, but the signal was weak, and the call wouldn't go through. I could hear the engine of the car behind me roaring louder, almost as if it was right inside my head. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, my car's engine straining to keep up. Suddenly, the car behind me swerved into the opposite lane and pulled up beside me. I glanced over and felt a wave of terror wash over me. The driver's seat was empty. The car was driving itself. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but the sight of the phantom car was too horrifying to ignore. With a sudden burst of speed, the phantom car shot ahead of me, cutting me off and forcing me to slam on the brakes. My car skidded to a halt, narrowly avoiding a collision. I watched in horror as the phantom car sped away, disappearing into the darkness. Shaking, I took a moment to collect myself before continuing my drive home. I kept a close eye on my rearview mirror, half expecting the phantom car to return. Thankfully, the rest of the drive was uneventful, and I made it home safely. Still trembling, I parked my car in the driveway and rushed inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, but the fear lingered. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the memory of the empty driver's seat. The next morning, I decided to do some research on the road I had driven the night before. I discovered that there had been numerous reports of strange occurrences on that stretch of highway, including sightings of a driverless car. According to local legend, the car belonged to a man who had died in a terrible accident years ago. It was said that his spirit continued to haunt the road, driving endlessly in search of a way to the afterlife.